This is BBC News. I'm Andrew Plant. Our top stories. A milestone for Saudi women who've hit the roads after the controversial ban on driving is finally lifted. A blast rocks an election rally held by Zimbabwe's President Mnangagwa. He's unhurt but says it was an attempt to kill him. Tens of thousands of people march through London to demand a vote on the final deal before Britain leaves the EU. A dramatic last-minute goal by the reigning champions Germany keeps their World Cup dreams alive. Hello and welcome to BBC News. In the last few hours, women in Saudi Arabia have finally been taking to the roads after the authorities lifted the world's only ban on women driving. It's part of a programme of modernisation under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but leading women's rights activists who challenged the ban will be marking the day behind bars. Bill Hayton reports.
Just after midnight in Riyadh, and a piece of history is about to be made. A perfectly normal act in every other country in the world, but until now, not in Saudi Arabia. Ujdin Al-Atiq takes the wheel of the family car and drives into the street.
All I can think about, I can still do my own stuff. I don't have to ask for anyone to take me around, and that's a very important, you know, for us to drive. Okay, maybe a lot of us don't need to drive, but for me, I used to drive. I used to do my own stuff, so I'm not used to someone to drive me around.
Enjoying the freedom of the city, this change has been a long time coming. Some activists have been demanding the right to drive for decades. Back in 2013, this woman took the wheel in defiance of the law. Some were punished for doing the same thing. Change is underway in Saudi Arabia. Cinemas have been allowed to open, along with the first music concerts and the first fashion week. It's all part of a modernisation drive led by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But while some restrictions are easing, Saudi women are still not free to travel, marry, divorce or even leave prison without the permission of a male relative. And those who demand too much change are still being punished. Only last month, more than a dozen prominent activists were arrested for demanding greater rights. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
Well, the BBC's Hannah Razek is in Jeddah. She's been telling us how people have been reacting there.
There is a great deal of excitement at this end. Like just moments ago, there was a convoy of women driving, celebrating this moment, and they were escorted by the Saudi traffic police as they are celebrating finally being allowed to drive after a ban that was in place for over 60 years now. Earlier on the very beginning of it, the very few first moments, we actually took a ride with one of the Saudi women riding her car here for the first time, and she was telling me that it feels like it's a historic moment at this end, and she feels so excited, and she really didn't believe that this will happen in this country, and she's so happy now. However, there's also a question, Lucy, about the rights Saudi women are still looking for. When we talk to women here in Jeddah, they told us they hope this is the beginning of the real change in Saudi women's lives. Some of them spoke to us particularly about the guardianship system. You know, until this moment, Saudi women cannot travel, get married or study without the permission from the male guardian, and that can be the father, the son, the husband, any male relative, and they hope that one day they will see this changing as well.
Well, Manal Al-Sharif is a Saudi Arabian women's rights activist and author of Daring to Drive, a Saudi Women's Awakening. She joins us now from Sydney. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. You've been campaigning for this for a long time, so presumably this is a triumphant day for you.
It's a historic day for me.
Okay, tell us a bit more about how that will be received in Saudi Arabia.
I think finally women have the keys to their lives, and that's it. Saudi Arabia will never be the same.
I can see that's making you emotional. How long has it been for you on this particular journey to get to this point today?
When I was sent to jail for driving while female in 2011, I made it a life mission that I would not stop campaigning until the first driver license is issued by the woman. So that day on June, it's unfortunately overshadowed by the recent arrests amongst prominent Saudi women like Iman al-Nafjan, Aziz al-Yusuf, Lujain al-Hadloul, and recently Nof Abdulaziz and Mia al-Zahrani. These women, they campaigned to end the ban on women driving in Saudi Arabia. Today, they are in jail. Other women rights activists like me being harassed, being shut down, being banned from leaving the country. It's overshadowed. This is what really makes me have mixed feelings about it. I'm still happy, I'm still hopeful, and I know women finally, when they are driving their cars, they would feel fully independent, and the male guardianship system will be obsolete, even if it still stands as a law, will be obsolete because women will not exercise it.
We know there are lots of things still in Saudi Arabia that women can't do, going out without a letter of permission from a male guardian, for example. So is this really a step forward, and will other things follow, or is this more of a cosmetic gesture?
I believe that the women, the day they decide they are free and they don't need male guardianship, that will make the law obsolete. Even if it stands today, it will make it obsolete. The woman will not ask for permission to take decisions in her life anymore. And that's how we really gonna change and overturn the law. So I'm launching today Miles for Freedom. If you go to milesforfreedom4.net, I'm launching 1 million miles toward ending the male guardianship in Saudi Arabia, asking all women from around the world to go to that link, tag herself and record any miles she's driven on her car, on her odometer. She logs that, and we're calling the king and his crown prince to release the Saudi women activists and to end the male guardianship in my country, which is literally enslaving women.
And do you think that's a realistic possibility? Is that day on the horizon, or do you think that's years away?
I believe we decide. I believe once women know their power, once women know who they are before the world told us who we should be, that's the day we are unstoppable. And that's the day I witnessed it happening today.
Okay, so small steps, but today a significant one in the lives of all Saudi women.
Yes, yesterday was history, today is historic.
Okay, Manal Al-Sharif, nice to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa says a blast at an election rally was an assassination attempt against him. The explosion happened shortly after he left the stage in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe's second city. At least 2 senior government officials were injured. Our Africa correspondent Will Ross reports.
The rally in Bulawayo's White City Stadium had just ended, and it looked as though a successful day of campaigning was coming to an end, when suddenly President Emmerson Mnangagwa had a close escape. Several people were knocked to the ground by the blast, and senior government officials, including a vice president, were seriously injured. As emergency workers rushed people to hospital, the politicians were ushered to safety. Hours later, President Mnangagwa was out in the city's hospitals, comforting those caught up in the blast. He appeared unflustered by events and brushed off what he considered to have been an attempt on his life.
These are my normal enemies, and the attempts have been so many. This is not the first attempt on my life. It doesn't, to me, it's normal. It exploded a few inches away from me, but it is not my time.
This is a critical time for Zimbabwe, the first election since Robert Mugabe was ousted. So far, the campaigns have been largely free from the intimidation and violence that have marred previous polls. But an explosion so close to the man seen as favourite to win next month is a worrying sign. Will Ross, BBC News.
President Trump has called America's immigration laws a laughingstock in a speech to Republican supporters in Las Vegas. It follows intense controversy over his policy of separating illegal immigrants from their children at the Mexican border. Our North America correspondent Chris Buckler reports.
After a week of mixed messages from the White House, there continue to be protests by people determined to show that they really do care about migrant families. President Trump has been under pressure amid the outcry over children being separated from their parents. But although it briefly looked like he was having to soften his policy, his language is hardening again. He told Republicans in Las Vegas that America would be overrun if the country showed any weakness.
Our immigration laws are a laughingstock all over the world. We're the only people. People walk in, they put a foot in, please, would you like to register? Other countries, they say, get the hell out of here.
The US Navy is working up plans to build detention centres similar to this. Cities capable of holding 25,000 migrants. And it's looking at further sites that could hold tens of thousands more. Many of those travelling to the US are claiming asylum, among them families trying to escape poverty and violence in Central America. But often they are deported, including this group who were sent back to Guatemala.
I have 8 children and I need to care for their well-being to move them forward. My goal was to give them an education so they don't suffer like us.
But it's these images of children being held in cages that will remain in many voters' minds as America's borders continue to divide. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Washington.
2 years after the Brexit referendum, tens of thousands of people took to the streets of London, demanding what they call a people's vote on the final terms of Britain's departure from the EU. It came as senior government ministers insisted that they will walk away from negotiations with Brussels rather than do a bad deal. Our political correspondent Ben Wright reports.
This was a mobilisation on a big scale. By people who had come to the capital from across the country, many of them hoping Brexit can be stopped. 2 years on from the referendum to leave the EU, the march organisers said more than 100,000 people turned up to demand another vote on the final Brexit deal. Sam is set. Ian runs a business in Surrey.
I can tell you right now, running 2 businesses, that this is the last thing I want to be doing on a Saturday. But I'm having to do it because I see that it's the only democratic opportunity I have to make my voice heard.
The criticism would be from Leave supporters, look, we've done this, you're trying to rerun the whole argument again.
Well, I could take that point, but it's an entirely different context this time. It's not whether we leave or stay, it's whether what the deal is.
First-time protesters joined veteran marchers, fired up by recent warnings from businesses like Airbus and now Siemens about the potential economic costs of Brexit.
Nobody voted to damage the country in this way.
And the people that lose are our children, who lose the right freedom that we've all enjoyed all of our lives. And there isn't enough of a reason to do this.
But some people in the path of the march had a very different view.
It's pathetic. Why? It's anti-democratic. We know what we voted for. We voted to leave.
Today, very few politicians, and absences were noticed. Labour's leadership are both opposed to any idea of a new public vote on the terms of the Brexit deal.
The Labour membership and Labour voters are changing their mind, and so I've always been clear the leadership of the Labour Party has to catch up with the people.
Leave supporters will look at this and think you're just trying to unpick the referendum.
Well, you know what's happening? This is what I'm picking up. A lot of people who voted Leave are like a lot of people who voted Remain, really worried now about how this is all playing out as Brexit reality dawns.
The tens of thousands of people marching past Theresa May's front door today are adamant that Brexit is not inevitable and can be stopped. But the governments insist that Brexit must and will happen. Next week, Theresa May will be back in the next round of negotiations. Ministers insist talks are on track, but they're prepared to walk away.
The Prime Minister has always said that nothing is agreed until everything's agreed, and that no deal would be better than a bad deal. And I think it's essential, as we enter the next phase of the negotiations, that the European Union understands that and believes it.
In another part of Westminster, there was a smaller demonstration in support of Brexit, clashing protests that prove again how divisive the decision to leave the EU remains. Ben Wright, BBC News.
Stay with us on BBC News, still to come. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern introduces her new bundle of joy to the waiting media outside the hospital where she gave birth.
Members of the neo-Nazi resistance movement stormed the world.
This is BBC News, the latest headlines. Saudi women celebrate by taking to the streets behind the wheel as the controversial driving ban is lifted. Zimbabwe is in shock after its president survives a bomb attack at an election rally. Let's get more now on Donald Trump's promise to continue his tough stance against migrants, saying the current US immigration laws are a laughingstock. Now, joining me live from Washington is Heather Cronk, the co-director of Showing Up for Racial Justice. Heather, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Nice to talk to you. You've actually been to the border, haven't you? Have you seen what's happening there firsthand?
I have. I was down at the border in Tijuana a few weeks ago as folks from what's known as the Refugee Caravan were traveling up through Central America and to the U.S. border.
What kind of things is your organisation doing? You help settle people with families, is that right?
Yeah, well, our primary work at Showing Up for Racial Justice is to organize white folks in the U.S. Around racial justice work. One of the things that we have engaged on in this particular crisis moment is to offer homes to folks who are going through detention, who have been detained by the U.S. government, and who have a chance at being released from detention if they have a sponsor in the U.S. Who will provide a home for them and open their doors. And so we've gone out to our network and to the broader community across the United States and asked people of conscience across the U.S. who disagree with the way that the Trump administration is moving around immigration to open their homes. And we've had hundreds of folks agree to do exactly that.
Now, we've seen the pictures over the last few days and heard the headlines of children being separated from their families and kept in cages. But just tell us about the reality that you've seen. Is that exactly what's happening, and is it still going on right now?
It is going on right now. What I saw at the border were hundreds of people, men, women, and children who had journeyed, many of them up to 3,000 miles from their homes, escaping political violence and personal violence, to present themselves for asylum at the U.S. border, which is a completely legal process. What I saw was Border Patrol and Immigrations and Customs Enforcement refuse entry to many of those folks, forcing them to camp outside the U.S. border. Many of them with very young children, trying to keep them calm, keep them safe, out in the elements, in the burning hot weather, in the rain, with very little to eat, relying on the hospitality of folks in the U.S. To help kind of nurture them through that process. What we're seeing on the border now is an increase in the escalation of ICE. They're being much more aggressive at the direction of the Trump administration and Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General. And so there are many, many more people who are coming into these detention centers and increasingly coming into camps that are being set up, whether it's in old Walmart buildings or now we're learning that military bases will soon be used as internment camps for these children and families.
Okay, a very interesting insight. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Nice to talk to you. Thank you. Now, Turkey's President Recep Erdogan has called on voters to return him to office with sweeping new powers on the final day of campaigning in the country's elections. But he's facing a tough challenge from a newly united opposition. Mark Lowen reports from Istanbul.
Turkey's opposition has finally found its voice. For 15 years it's been fractured, unable to challenge President Erdogan. But then came Muharrem İnce, a fiery centre-left man of the people who draws enormous crowds and is giving Turkey's president the battle of his political life. Turkey needs not a tired president, but one with fresh blood, he told his last rally in Istanbul. They believe the opposition can win a majority in parliament and force Mr. Erdogan to a second-round runoff in the presidential election. This is Taksim, the most iconic square in Turkey. Mr. Erdogan is here, he's there, he's everywhere. There's not a single opposition poster in sight. That unlevel playing field doesn't worry the Erdogan side, also out today. Conservative, pious Turks revere him as their saviour in once secular-dominated Turkey. He repeated his slogan, "One nation, one flag, one homeland, one state," and invited them to give his rivals an Ottoman slap tomorrow. Mr. Erdogan might still prove his doubters wrong, but for the first time in 15 years it seems possible that the Erdogan magic is running out. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Istanbul.
Football's world governing body, FIFA, has opened an investigation into Granit Xhaka and Xherdan Shaqiri's goal celebrations during Switzerland's World Cup victory over Serbia. They appeared to make an eagle gesture as they celebrated in a symbol of the two-headed eagle on the Albanian flag. Both players are ethnic Albanians from Kosovo, where a Serbian crackdown on the Albanian population only ended with NATO military intervention in 1999. And to keep up to date with what's going on in the World Cup, you can go to the BBC Sport website for team news. There's interviews and results and fixtures there too. Just go to bbc.com/World Cup. Now, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern presented her newborn baby girl called Neve to the cameras. Mrs Ardern, who's said to be regaining her strength with macaroni and cheese, and her partner Clark Gayford have been swamped with congratulatory messages from around the globe, including a private email from Queen Elizabeth. Twitter wags have dubbed the baby Prime Miniature.
I think probably, like everyone, we went through that struggle for a matter of months where we kept this short list of names, and we wanted to wait until the baby arrived to really see which one felt like it was. But we chose Neve because we just liked it. And when we met her, we thought she looked like she suited the name. Also, it means in various forms. It means bright and radiant and snow, which seemed like a good combination for Matariki and for solstice. Te Araha, though, that was something we settled on quite early. Te Araha was our way of reflecting the amount of love that this baby has been shown before she even arrived. And all of the names that we were gifted along the way, I thought, how do I reflect the generosity, particularly from all of the iwi who gifted us names? And Te Araha seemed to me to be a way that we could show that love and generosity.
And that's the way things look. Bye-bye for now.